Hey again. For our final panel of the day, we have 2020 Grammy winning producer of the year, ASCAP Vanguard Award, and co writer and producer of pretty much every song released by his sister Billie Eilish. It's Phineas O'Connell in conversation with one of his creative idols, Oscar and Tony winning songwriter Glen Hansard, moderated by Billboard's Tatiana Sarasano. So there's no time to waste, guys. Let's start the conversation.
Hi, Tatiana. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you guys doing?
I'm
Great, thank you.
How are you, Glenn? Good?
Great, really good here. Thank you. It's great to talk to anybody.
Isn't that true? I know. Thank you both for being here. I'm so excited to get to talk to you. And as Crystal said, we do have no time to waste, and I have tons that I want to ask you. So I'll just jump into it if that works for you guys. So you two have a lot of things in common, which we'll sort of go over today. But one of them is that you're both of Irish descent. Glenn, I know that you're actually in Ireland right now. Did you guys listen to Irish music growing up? Is that part of has that culture influenced your music at all? I'm curious.
You go first, Glenn.
Okay, well, for me that's an easier one to answer because in Ireland, everybody sings songs around the table. It's a kind of a natural occurrence that when your dad and mom would arrive home from the bar late on a Saturday night, they might bring all their friends, and next thing you know, you've got this kind of session going on. So I grew up kind of sitting at the table listening to what I would describe as my drunkles singing Irish ballads, and so absolutely I'm steeped in it. But I'd be very curious to hear about Phineas.
I feel like a little bit of a phony, saying that I'm of Irish descent, even though I am in terms of my grandparents and great-grandparents. I think just like I didn't manage to get out to Ireland until last summer when we were on tour. So it was always like a dream of mine to go to Ireland, but I never felt like it was attainable, just because we grew up not being able to afford to go almost anywhere. But we did grow up on a fair amount of Irish music, but I don't think there was ever when I think back to it, it wasn't like we were listening to you two because of how Irish it was, or we were listening to you, Glenn, or Damien because of the Irish heritage. It was just like the music that I loved, and I was listening to it all the time.
Yeah. What other music did you grow up on, Phineas?
I grew up on sort of like a combo. I grew up in the sorry to say it on ASCAP panel, but I grew up in the LimeWire era of like pirated music, and my dad, to throw him under the bus, philosophically was like, listen, I bought all of these albums on vinyl, and then I bought them all on CD, and now I am downloading them on LimeWire. LimeWire's gone, so I'm allowed to say all of this. Anyway, it was sort of a combo platter of like the music that had influenced and shaped them, and then the music that we had kind of like Billy and I, introduced into their lives. Growing up, I was a huge Ben Folds fan, and a huge sort of fan of like the wave of like 2000s American bands like My Chemical Romance and Green Day, and it was a sort of a like eclectic group of music. I think that like the number one artist that we grew up listening to was just like the Beatles at every turn. But sort of branching off from that, like my mom's been obsessed with Pink Floyd and Simon and Garfunkel my whole life. My dad's been obsessed with like King Crimson and Yes. And so those were kind of like the additional color palettes in terms of what we're listening to.
Yeah. Do you each remember the first song that you wrote?
Ooh, go Glenn.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I remember I wrote a song for my grandmother, and it was all about getting old, and I can relate to it. She was probably younger than I am now when I wrote it. And it was like sitting in this lonely place, not recognizing any face. You turn and take one more pace, stare into that empty space where you used to lie. So I used to dance. So it's like you can totally see where I'm going. Like I'm just literally taking one rhyme and just repeating that rhyme over and over and over. So it's interesting to kind of go back to that first song and sort of see because I grew up on Dylan and Leonard, and you know, and they were kind of my gods. And so for me, I never really thought about being a songwriter. I just wanted to do what they were doing, and they were writing songs. So I guess I just followed suit.
How old were you?
I would have been about 12 when I wrote that.
Ah,
Pretty good for a 12-year-old's first song, I would say.
I mean, you know, it's funny because I pulled it out a few weeks ago just because someone asked me about my first song, and I was actually able to remember every word. So I think that says something. Even though, so what it says is that I emotionally was telling something true because the words stayed with me. Otherwise, if I was just rhyming, then it wouldn't matter.
wow.
That's beautiful.
That's awesome. I was 11, 12 when I started writing songs too. They did not remain profound to me. But you know, I mean, that was just sort of like trying to, like, the way that I've always put it is like, I don't think you could call the songs that I was writing at the beginning of my life good per se, or quantifiably good. But I've always written like very structurally sound songs. Like they always have like a big fat chorus and a verse that you can sing along to, and you know when the bridge is the bridge, and you know what the post, like it's very like, looks like a, like, even if it's like a ugly house color, like a poorly painted house, like the beams are all in the right place of the house.
Yeah, which is so important. You can't have a house without the structure, right?
Well, I mean, there are great songs that have very atypical structures, and sometimes like the songs that I love have you know, odd atypical structures. But yeah, I think that was like very important to me growing up, is just sort of like writing material that felt stable. It felt like you could teach it to your 3 mates and they would learn how to play it in the garage. What I was doing at that age too.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know that you're both also fans of one another's work. So what do you think that you have in common as artists, or not, and what do you appreciate about each other's work?
I appreciate about Glen's work, I mean, so many things. I feel like, to me, Glen has a large catalog, and I don't want to, I always feel frustrated when people sum people up in terms of like a couple songs they're going to reference. So Glen does many things beyond this. But one of the things that I always took note of Glen's work was this ability to be wonderfully ambiguous in very specific terms. Like he'd write this song that, like, I'm sure meant, you know, one thing to Glen, and to me I was able to like jigsaw that song into like my own life, and just like have that tell my story to me when I was driving around listening to it in my car. And I feel like that's always something that I've been inspired by and sort of tried to do, is like write a song that may be very personal and professional to me that someone else can interpret totally differently. Which to me, like a song like The Moon, or Say It To Me Now, or When Your Mind's Made Up. Like those are the songs that I was first like introduced to of Glen's work when I was like 12, 13. And those songs all did that to me.
Oh, thanks, Phineas. That's so kind of you. I mean, it is true to say, to speak about that idea of, you know, building a song in looser structure that people can take what they want from it. I think that's really important. And you know, when I heard a writer say that the more specific you get, the more specific you get in anything, the more truthful you get, and the more you distill down, the more universal it becomes.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, so if you get really, really personal, like really speak to exactly what you're saying, and sometimes even use a name or use a phrase that someone uses, that actually, don't be afraid of not being understood, because it'll actually be understood on a more abstract level, on a more whatever way but you know, I mean, for me, like your song Die Alone is it's one of those songs that I, you know, if that was the first song on your record, I'd be like, I'm like, I want, you know, it's because a song is all about, you know, when you hear it, it's all about pulling you in. There has to be something about it that just pulls you to a place, you know, and that song really does that for me. And I love the intimacy of it, and and of course I love the the way you build it, like you say, the beams and the architecture, if you like, is really powerful.
Somewhere on YouTube, there is the day that I wrote that song, I played a show that night, and I had written that song in a green room backstage at a venue in, I think, Texas, and it was very like the first batch of your music that I was introduced to was a very like sort of strummy, angry guitar song that I eventually parsed down into a piano ballad. But for a while, it was a lot of really loud acoustic guitar. I'll send that to you.
Nice one. I'd like to.
Very Glen Hansard.
I thought it was very Damien Royce, but then he told me today that it was me.
And I just want to say for anybody watching, some of us are having a few Wi-Fi difficulties, so if you can't see us or hear us, that might be why, but we are still here. So yeah, just so that you know, it's not an error.
Just close your eyes and listen to it like an audiobook or a podcast, or any other a visual medium.
Listen to it like a phone call you shouldn't be listening to.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly that. And yeah, I know that you both also kind of had these moments where you blew up in the spotlight at a really young age. FINNEAS, I mean, kind of still with the success of When We All Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go, and all of your other accolades, and then also Glen through your role in Once. So how did having that kind of huge success at an early age impact you and impact your approach to whatever came next?
Well, that's a good question. Okay. Well, I mean, listen, not disregarding how lucky I've been, but it's like all of the things that I've gotten to do in terms of like producing albums and going on world tours. Those were all my lifelong dream from the time I was like 11 years old. So even though I like am young in terms of like the, human lifespan as a 22-year-old, like it still feels like a decade-long aspiration. And so that's just great. Like I think that just makes me feel very lucky, and I feel a great sense of like fulfillment from that. And I think that the thing that I always hoped for in terms of like an abstract goal was I always wanted to be able to not have another job and just have music be my job. And I think that's kind of, I've never redefined my hope and my expectations. So I think as long as I remain able to just write and produce music for people and have that in my bills, like I'll always deem my life as a success. And everything else is kind of just like the bonus level when you go down the pipe in Mario and you get to the level where there's just like all the boxes you can jump on, and like it's just like a time trial level like that. That's how it feels now. Just like this is just a cool like Easter egg. Because I really mean that. I felt like as soon as I bought like a computer off of like money that I had made from making a song on my computer, I was like, I'm done. I did it. I'm as successful as I ever hoped I would be.
Yeah, and I know, and Glen, I want to hear what you have to say too. But FINNEAS, I know we've also spoken before about like there can be a frustration with people saying like someone is an overnight success when you've obviously been working at it for like a decade. So that's an interesting point that you brought up too, I think.
Well, it's interesting, FINNEAS, when you speak about going from 12 to 22, right, which is where you are now. For me, 12 to 22 was another very interesting journey. And like you say, it's almost like you're imagining your life into being. You're imagining your future, and you're actually willing it. And a lot of people, put a lot down to talent, but actually, there's a huge amount that I would ascribe to will. I think if you're somebody who has a strong will, like if you're just like, and you could use the term driven, but if you just have it, if you can dream hard, you can achieve that. And I know that that's very kind of a bit esoteric or whatever to say, but actually, I found it to be true for myself. I mean, I was a massive Bob Dylan fan, for instance, and he was kind of my first musical love. And it took between, I suppose, 13, which is when I discovered him, between 13 and 23 for me to actually meet him. Now I know that sounds a bit name droppy. I don't mean it to sound like that. What I'm trying to say is that every bit of your body sets sail towards a destination. And that destination might be that, like you say, Phineas, to play on a big stage or to produce a record or to buy your first laptop off the money you made. For me at 13, when I first went on to Grafton Street and I took up my guitar, when I pulled my guitar out of my guitar case, I was declaring myself a musician. It was a huge feat. And I took it and I played my first song, and I remember someone threw in 20p. And like you, Phineas, I walked to the first cafe and I bought a cup of tea. But that cup of tea was the best cup of tea I ever drank because I earned it out of music. And I've pretty much had this attitude ever since, that any money I've ever earned in through music, I kind of consider it to be glowing. Like it's come through art. Nobody's gotten hurt by this. It's come through the work of the imagination. And I find it really, really powerful. So I completely relate to that. And you know, there was a moment for me, I was in The Commitments when I was 21. This film was a film by Alan Parker. And I remember the success of that. I really rejected the success of it. And I got really afraid. And I kind of was really embarrassed. And then when once happened, I was 35 when once happened. And I was so ready for it. Because I felt like I'd rejected it the first time. And then I spent the whole time hoping it would happen again. And then when Lightning in a Bottle happened twice, I was so ready, and so ready to embrace it and so ready to enjoy it. I still had awkward feelings. And it's funny, when I met you, Phineas, at the Electric Picnic, a festival here in Ireland during the summer, I was so pleased to meet you, but I recognized something, and I hope that I hope I'm not making a kind of an unfair judgment at all. I don't mean it, but I recognized an exhaustion in you. No, but I mean this, because you guys were on fire. You know, the gig was amazing, but I was in a band with Marquetta from once, and when we had that moment after the Oscars, we worked so hard, and I noticed that you guys were working so hard at that time, and I recognized an exhaustion between you two as a creative pair that I knew from myself and Marquetta. Now, it's not a bad thing or a negative thing. It's a really beautiful thing. It's almost like a camaraderie, like two soldiers, you know? And it was lovely to witness that and to feel that. And I knew it. I felt that feeling backstage.
I think it's the same for me, especially because I met you right after we got off stage. I think when you, like, the way that I remember feeling, and it's a satisfying way, is like you have nothing left. But it's only because you gave it like everything you had. And I think that's how I felt at the end of like every show that I've loved in my life. It's like, I've got nothing else to give.
And then you guys were jumping on a plane to Milan to do another show, and then you were coming back to Ireland the next day. So, I mean, I was in the middle of a kind of a holiday period, and to see you guys working so hard was really amazing. It was awesome.
Well, that's very sweet of you. I mean, I think, I think it is like that. I love that you brought it to Will, because inexplicably in my life, I feel that the same exact way. I feel like everything that I sort of pointed my like heart and my like just like not even ambition, but just like desire toward as like a 11, 12-year-old, like whenever that kind of like materializes in your life, you're like, wow, this is very strange and bizarre. I mean, just like meeting you, you know, I've gotten to meet a lot of people now that really, you know, completely shaped, you know, what I wanted to do with my life and the kind of music that I was interested in making. And the idea that you can kind of like design your path to intersect with someone else's path is like very exciting and inspiring to me. And I've obviously seen other people do it in their lives. So anytime I get to do something like that, like meet you after a show, there's a band I've loved for a long time called the Airborne Toxic Event. Mikkel, who's the lead singer of that, we've become friends. I think anytime that anything like that happens, you have this feeling of like, well, the odds of this are very low in terms of kind of like just abstract odds, like the age gap and the sort of period of life that you were living through. It's all the odds are low. So when it all happens, it's very exciting.
Well, can I speak to that for a second? Just because Damon's here and he's in the next room. There's a very interesting thing that happened with me. And this really speaks to what you're saying, Phineas. I was on tour with Damien. Damien had released O, and Damien brought the frames. I've never seen places like, you know, the Beacon or Radio City or, you know, the Wiltern. I'd never seen them. And it was only when I saw those places and I was able to give my affection a target. And I was able to sort of go, wow, these rooms are amazing.
Yeah.
That within 2 years of that tour, we were playing those rooms.
Mm.
And it was only until I could see what I was looking for, that the universe went click, click, click. Like you say, the chances of you meeting these people with age gaps and all. So what does the universe have to do to get you to get to that spot? It has to create this thing called Billie Eilish and Phineas, and you end up having to hold this. And basically, the universe ends up being creative on your behalf. If that makes sense. To go off on that particular tangent for a moment.
Yeah, I don't, you know, I feel like I put a lot of emphasis on luck in my own life because I witness talented friends of mine experience like less like success on paper than I feel that I've experienced. And I don't want to discredit their abilities or talent, but yeah, I think will and luck are both kind of like they're cousins maybe. You get lucky and you're really strong-willed, do a lot of stuff.
The harder you work, the luckier you get.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of like exhaustion, is there anything that you do, either of you, to kind of make sure that you don't get burnt out when you're on tour, when you're promoting an album, things like that?
Well, I'll answer that quickly. No is the answer. And not for me. I don't have anything that saves me from that. And sometimes I break through to a level of exhaustion where the gigs just get really, really good because you're just so empty. And so the critic gets out of the way and you just manage to go out there. So, because, you know, when you're on tour, Phineas, you know about this, when you're on tour, all that matters is that 2 hours or that hour and a half or whatever it is. All that matters is that 90 minutes. And so your whole day is a meditation leading up to a moment. And then everything that happens after that moment is not important either. So you become almost like your days become this kind of strange meditation towards a thing. Would you agree?
I almost agree. I have taken it upon myself to punish myself by making albums and EPs the whole time I tour now. So in my case, it's not that way anymore. It was at the beginning when we were playing really tiny tours and we were in a van, and we didn't have any like room to go. It was like that. It was sort of zen, and you set up all your own stuff and you go to the green room and have a bite to eat and walk back on stage and power everything on, turn all your amps on, and then start playing the show, and then you'd go to bed. And it was, the whole day was laser focused on that. But as our crew expanded and we started playing bigger venues, we, you know, accumulated roadies and guitar techs, and I no longer had the kind of meditative like coiling of cables around my hand for an hour or two every day. And so as a coping mechanism, I was like, well, I'm just going to start making music on the road. And so there, I mean, I can point to instances, like for instance, we were on tour in Texas during Austin City Limits in October of 19. And I thought, I bet we could write this James Bond theme this week. And so that entire week, we were playing a show every night, and I was, up until the moment I had to put on my like white sweatsuit to go get on stage, I was like working on the vocal or the piano or the synthesizer, and then I would go on stage and we'd play the show, and I'd get off stage and shower and go right back to working on the song, which is a little bit exhausting, and I don't think I could necessarily do that if I were in Billy's position playing these shows or your position playing these shows. You know, in Billy's show, I have the best time of my life, but I'm servicing her show and providing support for her on stage. I'm not having to necessarily like fully just drain myself engaging with every audience member in the building. I'm focused on playing my part really well and performing, energetically and being, stable for Billy to perform on top of. But yeah, I mean, touring's a funny thing, man. I get really, really fried touring. The forced hiatus that every touring musician is currently on because of COVID, other than the overwhelming sort of like empathy crisis I have of like feeling nervous and concerned and feeling the heartbreak of like everyone suffering because of this, the kind of day-to-day reality of getting to wake up and make myself a cup of coffee and write songs all day has been sublime.
Yeah, we actually, a viewer had a question that kind of relates to that. So I want to shout out Kira is wondering, how has working on music been different in quarantine than on tour?
Music, working in quarantine, Billy and I still, we're part of the same like quarantine bubble. So she lives at a different house than me, but we see each other almost every day and work on music. And she's like the only person I actually see and spend time with. So we work together the same way we always have. And then other projects I've worked on, like the Ben Platt record that came out recently, the Celeste record that came out recently, those have just been like totally remote operations. I just get sent a vocal and a piano part, and I produce everything around it, and send it back to them, and get feedback, record the feedback. So that's been fun and engaging too. I mean, it's all, the era of the home producer has been, advantageous for quarantine living. How do you feel? Right before we started this call, Glenn, you were saying that you only started writing a bunch of music during quarantine when you gave yourself no pressure to write a bunch of music.
Yeah, Phineas, I took the year off this year on the advice of a friend last year. Actually, a friend who's very connected with astrology and very interested in astrology. He said, "Listen, if you ever want to take a year off, let it be next year, because next year is a write-off."
When did he say this?
I know, he said this to me last August.
Oh my God.
He said next year is a write-off. He said, I don't know exactly what it is, but, and he made a very interesting point. Now I'm going off from now, but it's lovely. He had a beautiful man, Andrew Smith. But he said next year the feminine will speak. This was what he said. He said the feminine's about to speak, and when it speaks, it's going to speak loud and clear. Everybody's going to have to stay home. Everybody's going to have to reflect. Everyone's going to have to. And he was like, he was spot on. I called him a couple of weeks ago and I was like, my God. He said, listen, isn't she speaking? And I said, gee, it's incredible. But anyway, so I took the year off on his advice. And plus I was pretty wrecked, and I wanted to, I wanted to kind of get back to my song. But I took the year off and I decided not to give myself any pressure. And when all of this began with the lockdown and stuff, like you said, Phineas, I was just thinking about friends and family and making a lot of phone calls, checking in with people, feeling really concerned for everyone I knew. And it was only after that then songs began to kind of tipple out. And then there was a bit of a flood. And I just was kind of having, no, I don't know if they're any good, and that's not important. What's important is that you just kind of go at it, and you just sort of, what's that? Throw that out. What's this? What, so I think I've probably got a lot of ideas. Yeah. I don't know about song. Song might be a bit too early to use that word. But lots of stuff coming.
Yeah, I've been writing a lot too, and trying not to worry about quality at all. Just been writing everything. And and sometimes a couple days later I go, I like that. I still like that song. And some days I go, oh well, there's one line in there that's good. But yeah, I've been in the same boat. I've been writing actually far more during quarantine than I have in the last 12-month period in terms of like consistency.
Can I ask you a question, Phineas, about all of this? Did you find, for instance, when you were writing the Bond song, did you find that it was easier to write a song from the perspective of a character or a song that's about to be used in it? Because, then it's less personal. Because I found with Once, when we wrote those songs, myself and Marketta, we were just really buzzing off these characters that we were playing, and we were kind of writing, even though the songs were personal, we were writing to characters, and actually it ended up being really good work as a result. Only because the critic got out of the way, and we were able to just write these songs without thinking too hard about them. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about that. I've seen interviews of you prior, so I knew that some of the. But say it to me. There are a couple songs in Once that were not written because of Once the movie, right? There are a couple, right?
I think when I was older, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the Bond song, here's what I will say. Like, the Bond song posed its own, sort of level of challenges. But I think the fun part about writing kind of assignment songs, which is what I'll call like a Bond song, or like Billy and I are working on something else right now where we're having to write songs that are not from either of our own perspectives. It's easier to quantify whether you've nailed them or not, in my opinion. Yeah. Like, I feel like I remember like closing my computer when we'd finished recording all of No Time to Die, and I remember being like, well, that's the song. And sometimes when you're writing just a kind of an abstract diary entry of your own life,
yeah,
you're like, well, that is a song about this one experience, but maybe I'll write another song about that same experience tomorrow, and that'll be, there's a kind of it's more ambiguous. I think when you're doing this kind of assignment process, it is sometimes faster and like more fun. Like, I have more fun. I feel like I would. I haven't done it, so I'm not pretending I have. But I would love to write some musicals, because I would love to just write songs from the perspective of someone that's totally not me.
Yes, yeah, that's interesting. And can I have another question for you?
Sure.
I'm sorry, Tatiana. Can I ask one more question?
Please, go ahead.
I'm just really curious about when you work with Billy, because this is something that when I listen to those records, I'm guessing that there's an awful lot of quality, like there's an awful lot of quality control. I'm guessing there's an awful lot of, it's not good enough ready. It's not ready yet. It's not good enough. Do I believe this character? I would imagine that there's an awful lot of, really looking at it and really criticizing it before you're ready to release it. Does that make sense? But maybe I'm wrong.
No, you're right. It's very, the overhead is like virtually non-existent. Like, for every 5 songs that we put out, there were 5 songs being written. You know what I mean? There's no kind of what you and I are talking about, both of us doing during quarantine, of like writing songs willy-nilly. I don't do any of that with Billy. We write one song and we puzzle over it, and we just attack it from all angles, and when it's done, it's done. And if we never finish it, we never finished it. And it's very meticulous. It can be quite draining, but it's, I love the results of it, so I'll never get tired of doing it. But yeah, it's a very unique process. We really never write. We're much more likely to just write nothing one day than to write something and both of us be like, I don't know. Like, I don't know about that one. Like, it's just much. Yeah, it's an interesting process. I think it's because it's the two of us. I remember hearing an interview of yours on something like NPR or KCRW, probably back in 2017, where you were talking about you just put out an album, and you were saying that in the middle of the album, your producer or collaborator had come to you and said something to the effect of like, "This just isn't good enough," and you had to like restart. And I remember hearing that and being like, "Oh God," because I feel like that's always your fear when you're in the middle of a record. Is this good enough at all? I think that Billy and I function that way on the daily. I think the best example is like, if one of us writes a couple lines for a second verse, the second verse might seem like the sort of least consequential element of the song. If you've got an amazing first verse, an amazing pre-chorus, an amazing chorus, who's going to decide your song is terrible because the second verse doesn't do much? And in Billy's case, you know, she doesn't think about it that way. You know, if it's not interesting enough, she's like, that's not interesting.
Yeah.
And I love that about her. I think that's one of the things that makes her great.
I do too, and I recognize it because I had the same thing with Marquetta. Marquetta would listen to my songs and go, I don't believe that. That's not true. And I go, well, it's kind of true. And she'd be like, well, what do you mean it's kind of true? Well, I mean, I'm just being a bit poetic. She said, don't be poetic, be truthful. It's more interesting. And she'd say it in a very and so it ended up making for better songs. And so I was curious about your relationship with Billy in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, she's very much a writer in her own right to some degree, but there are instances that I can point to where her incredibly effective like role as a songwriter collaborator, and again, this is only in some cases. Sometimes she's putting pen to paper and whatever, but sometimes she's at her most effective if I write a whole verse and I sing to her my verse and I bow, and she looks at me and she goes, it needs to be like this, and she just tells me what it needs to be like, and I go, okay, and I go back in and I write it and I go, this, and she goes, that's better. And that's just the kind of like a testament to the different ways that collaboration can still be incredibly instrumental to songs. And you know, like there are things that I would never have written if she hadn't said your first draft of that is not good enough, you need to write it again.
Yeah, it's
which
tough.
sometimes can be really annoying because you're like, oh, you write it, how about? But really,
Exactly.
it's still your onus to go write it, you know.
Well, I mean, you know, because you're part of one of the great collaborations, you know, the Lennon and McCartneys and the Jaggers, and you know, it's that thing of when we have a foil, we sometimes can go so much further.
It's true. Did you feel that way about Marquetta, and have you felt that way about like what are the relationships you can point to in your career that have felt that way to you, where you feel like, you know, maybe a contentious creatively, where you disagree about stuff and it almost always makes it better. It doesn't, you know, hurt.
Yeah, well, you know, it's funny, and I'm not saying it because he's in the next room, but my relationship with Damien would be very much, you know, we occasionally would get together and play each other's songs, and it would be, sometimes it's like there's blood all over the floor by the end of it, you know, because but all in the name of getting the thing right, all in the name of doing it right. But Marquetta was very, like, in a way, that was kind of how our creative relationship sparked, because she listened to a song I was writing, and I remember I just sort of going, oh, I don't know about that, and I was like, wow, because I'd been used to being in a band where I was their songwriter, and that was really disputed, and it was never really, you know, I had definitely I had friends in my band, Cullum and Joe are they're definitely, they would have input and they would let me know and they would guide me, but I guess in a way I may have created a bit of a barrier, as in, like, don't come near this, you know.
They're working on the great drum part or the great lead guitar line. It's less about the lyrics that you wrote, you know.
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes. Whereas Marquetta was straight in with the lyrics, you know.
Yeah.
You know, and Damien the same. And so in a way, I suppose, you know, myself and Damien have never worked together on songs, but we definitely sit down and just talk about songs and talk about each other's songs in a very direct way for the sake of the work.
It sounds like you value, as much as I do, the presence in your life of another artist who you don't really collaborate with, but you share opinions and maybe anecdotes and advice and criticism, but it's not a traditionally collaborative relationship. I find that the more time I spend in the kind of, like, air quotes, like, music industry, the more I value my, like, relationships with friends of mine who write great songs, and not writing great songs with them, but just playing them my songs and having them play me their songs and telling each other our favorite parts of it and a line that we want to hear earlier in the song, you know, just things that, you know, are helpful. But it's, yeah, I find it's, I put more and more importance on that, on the relationship it sounds like you have with Damien, where it's, you're not sitting there trying to write a song together for hours. You're saying, listen to the song I wrote, and he's telling you how he feels about it.
Yeah, yeah.
I really don't want to interrupt you guys because this is so fascinating, but we are running out of time. So just to get in one question from our viewers, a lot of people are wondering about tips that you have for songwriting. Is there anything that you would want to say?
I'm really interested to know your tips, Glenn.
Oh God, tips. You know, well, there's a lovely line by, I always come back to this myself. There's a lovely line by Ernest Hemingway. And when he talks about, you know, he says, if you're ever stuck and you're not writing, just write one true line, something that's absolutely true. And from there, everything will blossom. And I have to say that whenever I've been stuck, that bit of advice has always stayed with me. If I write something that I actually, even if it's something that I'm not really sure I want people to know, but if I even veil it very thinly and I just say it, it brings me to the next part of the song, and next thing I know, I'm on flow.
It's pretty brilliant. My piece of advice would be an extension of like I feel like I often hear authors say things to the tune of like books belong to their readers, right? Or like, you know, it's all in the eyes of the beholder. I think it's really not your job to over-examine or over-analyze the thing that you're in the middle of making or that you're about to make. And it's, yeah, I think it's a little bit like Jackson Pollock paintings or something. I think if I wrote every line and every melody with like intention and, you know, purpose, I think it would all be very mathematical and stale and sort of cold. And I think that the stuff that I'm the most proud of is the stuff that you just kind of like close your eyes and throw a dart at the dartboard and see what happens. And yeah, it's just I think songs are like yours to write and for others to analyze in a weird way. Yeah,
that's good advice. You know, I would concur with that and add that you know, that the hardest thing with writing songs is getting out of your own way, and I would say that just to try to remember ideas first, reality later. Don't worry about a lyric not sitting right. Don't worry about it. Just put it in there. And once if it begins to feel like something, then you can go in and edit it later and fix it and pull stuff out and dump stuff. But just don't be precious about it being perfect. Just go in and make something and just make something. And once you make something, that'll turn into something else. You know.
So true.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you, Phineas. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Tatiana. Also, your psych friend. Oh my goodness. What a for knowing what 2020 was going to be. Thank you so much. And thank you all for tuning in today. And congratulations to all of our pop winners, ASCAP Pop Award winners today. And you can check out some exclusive virtual Pop Award content on ASCAP Everything. Check it out. Next week is our ASCAP Virtual Screen Music Awards. So tune in next Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern for the Screen Music Centric Day of Education and Conversation here at the ASCAP Experience. We'll see you then. And thank you again for being on this panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to see you, Tatiana. Thank you so much, Crystal.
Bye, Tatiana. Thanks.